Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something huge, something fundamental, but maybe something you haven't thought about quite this way before.
We're talking about the drive for social status.
Exactly. And we're going beyond the usual stuff about ambition or keeping up with the Joneses. We've got a stack of material here, and we're diving into the biosocial evolution of how we signal status.
Yeah, that's the goal. We want to trace this whole feedback loop. How did we get from basic primate dominance displays?
Chest beating and intimidation.
Right, that kind of thing.
Ah,
Through human cooperation, which changed the game, and then somehow end up in this modern world where status is, well, incredibly complex and often a source of real anxiety.
okay, let's unpack that term right away. Biosocial evolution. Because the argument here, the core idea from these sources, isn't just culture or just biology acting alone, is it?
Not at all. It's this constant back and forth. It's the interplay between our deep biological programming, like how our brains are literally wired for this stuff, neurochemistry and all that, and then the cultural factors, the economic system you live in, the social norms, what your specific group values. All of that shapes how status works.
So our biology pushes us to care about rank.
Definitely.
But our culture, our civilization, writes the specific rules for how we get it and maybe even what it is.
Exactly. And, a key point in the material is that this relationship is bidirectional. Culture shapes biology over time, and biology influences cultural development. But the endpoint we're exploring today is how modern society has kind of weaponized this evolved need, turned it against us almost.
Okay, and to map this whole journey, the sources highlight this fundamental split right from the start. Two basic ways humans have achieved status throughout history.
That's the core dichotomy, dominance versus prestige. You really need to get this distinction to follow the rest.
So dominance first, that's the older pathway.
Yeah, that's the ancestral one, the one we share with lots of other primates.
Yeah.
It's status through force, basically. Coercion, intimidation.
Being the biggest, the strongest, the most aggressive.
Right. It's about being able to take resources, to scare off rivals. The signal is pretty blunt. I'm tough. Don't mess with me or I'll hurt you. It's about inspiring fear.
Okay, straightforward enough. Seems
Uh-huh.
effective in a brutal sort of way. Common in the animal kingdom.
It is, but then there's prestige. And this is where humans really diverge, where things get more complex and uniquely human.
Prestige isn't taken by force, then.
No, it's based on freely conferred deference. That's the key phrase. People choose to respect you, to defer to you,
Why would they do that?
because you offer something valuable to the group. Exceptional skill, deep knowledge, maybe you're incredibly generous or wise or fair, things that benefit everyone.
So the signal isn't I can hurt you, it's more like,
It's like, I am genuinely useful, I have skills we need, you want me around, and you willingly grant me influence because of that value. It's about earning respect, not demanding it.
okay, dominance by fear, prestige by respect. Got it.
And the big story we're tracking in this deep dive is how human evolution, particularly with cooperation, initially pushed us away from pure dominance towards prestige.
Because bullying got you punished by the group.
We'll get into that, yeah. But then how civilization, especially with agriculture and large societies, kind of twisted things. It created a system where striving for prestige, for culturally defined success, ends up feeling just as stressful, just as high stakes as that old dominance game ever was, maybe even more so.
Right. It's like we swap one pressure cooker for another,
Mhm.
possibly even hotter one. Okay, let's start digging into the foundations then. Section 1. The primate and Paleolithic biological roots. We need to understand just how deep this status stuff goes.
Absolutely. Looking back at our evolutionary history, it's really clear that this drive to know where we stand, to track rank, it's not just a modern obsession. It's
Well,
fundamental.
it's baked in.
It really seems to be. Dominance, as we said, is the ancient way. Shared with chimps, gorillas, you name it. Bigger, stronger, more intimidating means you get first dibs on food, mates, the best sleeping spots. Simple as that.
And the signals are physical, obvious, like you said, threat displays, maybe size itself, hard to miss.
Impossible to miss.
Mm.
But prestige, that required a different kind of calculation. As early humans started cooperating more, facing shared dangers, hunting large animals together, raw bullying wasn't always the best strategy anymore.
Because you needed the skilled hunter or the tool maker, even if they weren't the biggest guy.
Exactly. Suddenly, competence, skill, knowledge, these things became incredibly valuable to the group's survival. The person who knew where to find water or how to make the best spear points or track that elusive animal, They gained influence.
So prestige status is earned. It's granted by the collective because you're useful.
Yes, others choose to defer, but it's often conditional, right? You have to actually use that skill for the group. Being the best hunter doesn't get you prestige if you hoard all the meat.
Ah, okay. So the signaling involves demonstrating skill, but also things like fairness, generosity.
Demonstrable value, and often, yeah, a willingness to share. That builds trust and reinforces your position.
Okay, now this is where it gets really wild for me. The neurobiology. The sources are basically saying our brains are physically built to track this stuff. Like there are specific circuits.
That's what the evidence strongly suggests. It's not just a metaphor. Research points to dedicated neural networks. We're talking specific areas involved, like the prefrontal cortex that's for executive functions, planning, judgment.
Right.
The amygdala, which handles emotion processing, threat detection.
Okay. Makes sense for dominance and fear.
And, crucially, the reward system, specifically the ventral striatum. This whole network seems wired to constantly monitor social rank, compare ourselves to others, and track where we fit. It's ancient, it's sensitive, and it's basically always running.
Wow. So getting that promotion or even just having someone genuinely listen to your idea in a meeting, that has a real chemical payoff.
It absolutely does. That's the biological reinforcement.
Yeah.
Gaining status, receiving that deference, it triggers the brain's reward circuits. Dopamine gets released. Evolution made sure that achieving status feels good, physiologically good, to encourage us to keep seeking it.
It's literally rewarding.
Yes. But then there's the dark side, the threat side.
The fear of losing status or being rejected.
Exactly. And this is where the evolutionary mismatch can really bite us in modern life. Social exclusion, being demoted, ignored, publicly shamed, any perceived threat to your status, it triggers an acute stress response.
Like serious stress.
Oh, yeah. We're talking a surge of cortisol, the main stress hormone. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks into high gear, heart rate up, blood pressure up. And the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the body's central stress command system, it gets activated.
Hang on. Are you saying my anxiety about, I don't know, bombing a presentation or getting unfriended online, that uses the same biological stress pathway as our ancestors facing a literal predator?
Biologically speaking, yes. The systems are deeply linked. Ancestrally, being kicked out of the group, being ostracized, that was often fatal. No protection, no shared food. So our brains evolved to treat social threats, rejection, loss of rank, with the same life or death urgency as a physical threat.
That's intense. It makes everyday social interactions seem incredibly high stakes, biologically speaking.
They kind of are,
Yeah.
from your brain's ancient perspective.
Okay, so backing up again to the Paleolithic. Before status symbols like fancy clothes or money existed, how did people reliably signal their rank? What were the cues?
They had to be things you could easily see, easily perceive, and importantly, things that were hard to fake. They needed to be honest indicators of fitness or value.
Like body language.
Definitely. Nonverbal cues were huge. Think about posture, standing tall, taking up space, expansive gestures. Compare that to slumping, avoiding eye contact. One signals confidence and high rank, the other submission. Direct gaze versus averted gaze, same deal.
It's almost instinctual how we read those cues even now.
It is. And the body itself was a primary signal, just basic health and vigor.
Looking strong and healthy.
Right. In an environment with disease and scarcity, simply looking robust was a powerful signal. It advertised good genes, good immune function, overall fitness, important for survival, crucial for attracting mates. It wasn't vanity. It was a verifiable biological billboard.
And what about material things, even before, like permanent possessions?
Even then, yes. Think about the spoils of a successful hunt. Bringing back a large kill was temporary, but undeniable proof of skill and provisioning ability.
Right, you couldn't fit that.
Or having well-crafted tools, a spear that worked better, an axe that held its edge. These signaled competence, skill, investment of time and effort. They were tangible evidence of value, hard for someone without the skill to replicate. These early, often physical and non-arbitrary signals laid all the groundwork for the much more complex systems that came later.
Okay, so we're moving out of that more purely biological, primate-like world. Section 2, the biosocial transition in Paleolithic societies. This seems like a really pivotal moment, the shift away from just raw dominance toward this earned prestige.
It's absolutely crucial for understanding humans, because while dominance didn't disappear, obviously something changed significantly when our ancestors started relying heavily on cooperation.
Especially for things like hunting big game, right? You can't do that alone easily.
Exactly. Hunting large, dangerous animals, defending against predators, sharing childcare, All these required intense coordination and trust. The group's success became paramount. And that changes the power dynamic. The group, acting together, becomes stronger than any single individual, no matter how dominant.
Which leads to this fascinating idea you mentioned earlier, counter-dominance or reverse dominance hierarchies.
Right. Anthropological studies of many contemporary and recent hunter-gatherer groups show this pattern. They often exhibit strong egalitarian tendencies, not because nobody tries to dominate, but because the group actively works to prevent anyone from dominating too much.
They push back against bullies.
Aggressively so.
Right.
If someone becomes too arrogant, too boastful, tries to hoard resources or bosses people around, the group has ways of dealing with it.
How did that work without, police or formal laws?
It was managed through coalitionary action. The rest of the group bands together. This could range from subtle things like gossip and ridicule.
Social shaming.
Yeah, very effective. To more overt actions like deliberately disobeying the would-be dominant individual, refusing to cooperate with them, ostracizing them socially.
What do you mean physically?
In extreme cases, yes. Expulsion from the group, which was often a death sentence, or even collective violence against the aggressor.
Yeah.
The message was clear. Unchecked dominance will not be tolerated.
That's a powerful evolutionary pressure right there. If trying to be the alpha bully gets you potentially killed or kicked out by the collective.
Then you need a different strategy to gain influence. The adaptation has to favor a way to get status without triggering that dangerous collective backlash.
And that pathway is prestige.
Precisely. You gain influence not by threat, but by demonstrating your value, your skills, your willingness to contribute and share. You earn respect. You don't demand submission through fear. Prestige becomes the safer, often more effective, route to status in these highly cooperative groups.
Okay, this feels like the perfect time to really nail down costly signaling theory. You mentioned it earlier, but it seems absolutely central to how prestige and later status symbols actually work.
It is. It's a core concept from evolutionary biology, but it applies perfectly here. The basic idea is straightforward. For any signal of quality to be believable, it has to be costly.
Costly in what sense? Money? Effort? Risk?
It could be any of those. Costly in terms of time, energy, resources, risk. Something that makes it difficult or impossible for a low-quality individual to fake the signal. If signaling high status was cheap and easy, everyone would do it, and the signal would become meaningless. It wouldn't convey any real information.
Right, loses its honesty.
Exactly. Honesty is maintained by the cost. Think of the classic example, the peacock's tail. It's huge, cumbersome, makes it easier for predators to catch them. It's incredibly costly to grow and maintain.
So only a really healthy, fit peacock can produce such an extravagant tail.
Precisely. The cost guarantees the honesty of the signal, I'm so fed I could afford this handicap. Now, apply that to Paleolithic human life. What were the costly signals then?
You mentioned hunting prowess.
That's a prime example.
Yeah.
Successfully hunting a large, dangerous animal, a mammoth, a giant elk, required incredible skill, coordination, bravery, physical fitness. It was risky. It took time and energy.
You couldn't just pretend you did it.
Right. You either came back with a kill or you didn't. It was an undeniably costly display of competence and, crucially, resource provisioning ability. The whole group benefited from that success. A weak, unskilled, or cowardly individual simply couldn't pull it off. The cost guaranteed the signal's reliability.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the other big one you mentioned, generosity? Sharing the kill. That seems costly in a different way. You're giving away resources you acquired.
It is costly, and that's exactly why it's such a powerful signal. Think about hosting a feast after a big hunt, giving away large portions of meat. You're demonstrating not only that you can acquire massive resources,
Signaling your skill again.
but also that you're willing to share them. This signals altruism, trustworthiness, and your value as a coalition partner. It's like you're investing in social capital.
Building goodwill for the future.
Exactly. It's a form of delayed reciprocity. I'm sharing with you now, signaling I'm a reliable partner, so you'll support me later when I need it, or cooperate with me on the next hunt. It cements social bonds and builds your reputation as someone valuable to have around, someone worthy of prestige.
This whole system tracking who's skilled, who's generous, who's maybe faking it, who owes whom, sounds like it requires some serious brain power.
Absolutely. This couldn't work without significant cognitive leaps, particularly the evolution of what psychologists call theory of mind.
The ability to understand that other people have intentions, beliefs, desires, that they have minds like our own.
Right. And to think about what they might be thinking about you. Plus, complex language. These two things together allowed for something revolutionary. reputation management.
Meaning your status wasn't just about what people saw you do right now?
Exactly. Language allows us to talk about people who aren't present. We can share information about who's reliable, who is skilled, who cheated someone last week. Your reputation, what people said about you, became a crucial, constantly monitored resource.
So gossip wasn't just idle chat. It was actually a vital social mechanism for tracking status and trustworthiness.
Very likely, yes.
Yeah.
It allows a group to collectively build and maintain a picture of everyone's social standing and reliability. Suddenly, status could also be encoded in stories, traditions, shared symbols, things beyond just immediate physical displays.
Which sets the stage for culture to take on a much bigger role in defining status later on.
Precisely. The cognitive and linguistic tools were now in place. Reputation, symbolism, shared cultural knowledge. These became intertwined with status signaling, paving the way for the huge changes that came with settled life in agriculture.
Okay, so that Paleolithic balance, favoring prestige earned through cooperation and skill, seems almost nice in a way.
Yeah.
But the sources argue it didn't last. Section 3, cultural amplification and stratification. This is where the Neolithic shift, farming, changes everything.
It really does. Agriculture, settling down, producing and storing food surpluses. This wasn't just a change in lifestyle, it fundamentally rewired the social structure.
Because not everyone had to hunt or gather anymore.
Right? Suddenly you could have specialists. You could have people accumulating wealth, stored grain, land. This inevitably led to much deeper social stratification than was typical in mobile hunter-gatherer bands. Hierarchy deepened, and cultural factors started having an immense influence on who got status and why.
This is where that term gene culture coevolution really kicks in strongly.
Yeah, it accelerates dramatically. It's this idea that culture creates new selective pressures that over generations can actually shape our genes, and our evolved psychology then influences further cultural development.
Can you give a simple example of that, Dan?
Well, the classic one is lactose tolerance. The cultural practice of dairy farming created an environment where genes allowing adults to digest milk conferred a huge advantage. So those genes spread rapidly in dairying population.
Okay. And applied to status?
Applied to status, the cultural shift towards settled life, surplus, and hierarchy created a new environment. This environment might have selected for psychological traits suited to navigating these complex social structures. Maybe heightened sensitivity to social comparison, maybe greater anxiety about rank. The culture changed the game, and our biology started adapting to the new rules.
And one of the biggest new rules seems to be about displaying wealth, not just having it.
Exactly. With surplus comes the ability to engage in what Thorstein Veblen, writing much later but observing the same fundamental dynamic, called conspicuous consumption.
This is using expensive stuff just to show off.
Pretty much. It's the public display of wealth through buying and using expensive, often non-essential, and sometimes downright wasteful goods and services, primarily for the purpose of signaling your high social rank.
So it's like the costly signal idea, but amplified and maybe detached from actual utility.
That's a great way to put it. Remember the hunter sharing his kill. That was costly, but it also provided real value, food, and signaled useful traits, skill, generosity. Conspicuous consumption takes the costly part, but often strips away the direct utility. The waste itself becomes the signal.
I have so many resources, I can afford to burn them on this giant tomb, or this imported spice that does nothing, or these clothes that are impractical but rare.
Precisely. Building monumental architecture that requires immense labor but houses no one. Elaborate burials filled with goods the dead can't use, wearing fabrics dyed with incredibly rare and expensive materials. These are all signals on a grand scale. They shout, I command so many resources that I can afford this spectacular waste purely for status. It's the Neolithic or civilized version of the hunter's feast, made permanent and often institutionalized.
And this shift also means status cues become less about inherent biological quality and more about abstract symbols, things you have to learn the meaning of.
Exactly. The link between the signal and the underlying quality becomes arbitrary, defined by culture. Strength or hunting skill are directly observable. But the status conveyed by wearing purple dye, that only works if your culture agrees that purple signifies royalty or wealth.
Which leads to things like those historical sumptuary laws you mentioned.
Yes, those are a perfect example. Laws explicitly restricting who could wear certain fabrics, silk, specific furs, certain colors, or even certain styles of clothing. This made clothing an instant, legally enforced, and highly visible status marker. But you had to know the code. If you didn't know only nobles could wear ermine trim, the signal was lost on you. Status became increasingly reliant on shared cultural knowledge.
And formal titles, job roles, religious positions, courtly manners, these are all abstract signals too.
Absolutely. Your rank wasn't just about what you could physically do anymore. It was about your position within an institution, your title, your lineage, your ability to navigate complex social rituals. These are abstract, culturally constructed markers that require specific knowledge to decode and respect.
Okay, now here's a really critical link the sources make. This increasingly stratified, complex social world doesn't just change the rules of status. It starts to impact our biology again, particularly through stress. This is that biosocial feedback loop biting back.
This is arguably one of the most profound consequences. In these highly stratified societies, being at the bottom, having chronically low status, isn't just inconvenient, it becomes a source of sustained social threat.
Remember that HPA axis, the stress system that treats social rejection like a predator.
Exactly. In a system with huge visible inequalities, and where your rank feels fixed or precarious, that ancient threat detection system can get stuck in the on position. It's not an occasional alarm anymore. It's a constant low-level hum of perceived danger.
So poverty, marginalization, feeling constantly judged or less than, this chronically activates your body's stress response.
That's the argument, and there's considerable evidence for it. Chronic activation of the HPA axis means prolonged exposure to stress hormones like cortisol. And we know that chronic stress has measurable, damaging effects on the body.
Like what kind of effects?
It's linked to a whole range of health problems. Increased risk of cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, heart attacks, impaired immune function, making you more susceptible to illness, higher rates of anxiety disorders and depression. The link between socioeconomic status and health outcomes is well established, and this chronic stress mechanism is seen as a major biological pathway explaining that connection. Your social position literally gets under your skin.
Wow. So the structure of society itself can make people sick through these evolved stress pathways.
It seems so, which adds another layer to stat signaling. It's not just about climbing the ladder anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, if low status triggers this deep physiological stress, then maybe some status displays, buying that slightly nicer car, wearing the brand name clothes,
Yeah.
getting that validation online, maybe part of their function is actually self-regulation.
Like trying to soothe that internal alarm bell.
Exactly. By achieving even small, temporary signals of status or acceptance, you might be momentarily reducing that feeling of social threat, calming the HPA axis, trying to reassure your ancient brain that you're okay, that you belong, even if objectively your circumstances haven't changed that much. It becomes a defensive mechanism against chronic social anxiety.
This is getting heavy. Okay, section 4. The transformation of status seeking into intense competition and anxiety, especially in the modern world. This feels like where it all comes home for listeners today. The argument is that we've shifted from prestige earned through contribution to something much harsher.
Yeah, the sources describe it as a shift towards a more brutal competition, often over resources and positions that are controlled by large institutions, corporations, governments, financial systems. Status isn't just about being respected by your local band anymore. It's about succeeding in these vast, often impersonal systems.
And this modern context amplifies the insecurity and the visibility of it all.
Massively. The sources point to 4 key factors that really turn up the heat on this evolved status drive, making it a source of existential pressure for many.
Okay, let's break those down. Factor 1, systemic inequality.
This is about the sheer scale of wealth and power concentration we see today. The gap between the rich and poor isn't just numbers on a page. It creates huge, visible disparities in basic life chances.
You mean access to things like good health care, safe neighborhoods, quality education, fair treatment by the justice system?
All of that, when these fundamental things are so unequally distributed, and that inequality is constantly visible, you see it online, in the news, in your own city, creates a sense of relative deprivation.
Even if you're not starving, seeing that massive gap makes you feel worse off.
Yes, and studies link this directly to poorer mental health outcomes, especially depression and anxiety in lower socioeconomic groups. It's not just about absolute poverty. It's the stress of financial insecurity combined with the feeling of reduced control over your own life and future, constantly highlighted by the visible success of others.
Okay, factor 2, the loss of an exit. This contrasts with those hunter-gatherer bands.
Right. Ancestrally, if you were in a bad social situation, if you were being bullied or just didn't fit in, there was often the option, difficult, maybe, but possible, to leave and join another group or form a new one. Migration was a safety valve.
But in settled, complex societies, especially modern nation-states,
Where can you go? All the land is owned, borders are controlled. Your fate is much more tied to the hierarchy you're born into or find yourself in. You can't just opt out.
that sounds trapping.
It creates a feeling of being trapped, yeah. And when you feel trapped and are constantly failing to meet the standards of the hierarchy, it can lead to profound hopelessness and internalized shame. You start blaming yourself for being stuck in a system you can't escape. That's a potent driver of low self-esteem and depression.
Which connects directly to factor 3, and this one feels particularly modern and tricky: meritocracy and blame.
This is a really sharp point of the analysis. The dominant narrative in many Western societies pushed by elites is meritocracy. Success is purely down to individual talent, hard work, and effort. Anyone can make it if they just try hard enough.
The American dream narrative, basically.
Essentially. But the dark side of this ideology emerges when you live in a society with massive structural inequalities. The promise of meritocracy often doesn't match reality for many people. Opportunities are not equal.
So if you don't succeed, the meritocracy narrative implies.
It must be your fault. You weren't talented enough, you didn't work hard enough, maybe you lacked the right character or grit. Failure becomes a sign of personal deficiency, a moral failing almost.
Instead of maybe acknowledging systemic barriers like inherited wealth, discrimination, lack of access to education, or just bad luck.
Exactly. The ideology conveniently shifts all blame away from the system and onto the individual. This is incredibly damaging psychologically. It transforms structural disadvantage into personal shame, intensifying anxiety and self-loathing. You feel like a failure, and you're told it's entirely on you.
That's a heavy burden. It also makes it harder to justify social support systems, doesn't it? If failure is personal, why should society help?
That tension is absolutely inherent in the system, and it adds to the stress, punishing the individual for systemic failings.
Okay, and the final amplifying factor, the scale of comparison. Our ancestors compared themselves to who? The people in their immediate group.
Probably, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
50, 100, 150 people at most. Your reference group was local and limited.
But now,
Now, thanks to mass media, the internet, social platforms, we are constantly, relentlessly bombarded with images and stories of the most successful, wealthiest, most attractive, most accomplished people on the planet.
the curated highlight reels of literally billions.
Right, so upward social comparison isn't an occasional thing. It's a pervasive, daily, hourly activity. You're constantly measuring yourself against these often unrealistic, globally broadcast standards.
And the psychological result of constantly comparing your average life to the top 0.01% has got to be.
Pretty brutal. The sources point to chronic envy, pervasive feelings of inadequacy, low self-worth, and this constant, nagging fear of being judged by others and by yourself as falling short, as being a loser in this giant global status game. It fuels status anxiety on an unprecedented scale, and the feedback is instant thanks to technology.
It's like our brains, wired for local comparison, are completely overwhelmed by the global scale.
That seems to be a big part of the problem.
Now, the analysis goes deeper, suggesting different types of elites actively shape this status game, defining the rules and turning up the pressure. This is about institutional power, right?
Yes, how different groups use their positions to define what counts as status, thereby controlling the competition. We could sort of categorize them. First, you have politicians and clergy.
What kind of status do they define?
Historically and today, they often define virtue and worthy belonging. They establish laws, moral codes, religious doctrines that dictate who is considered a good or worthy member of society and who isn't.
And how does that amplify stress?
By institutionalizing discrimination. Think of caste systems, racial segregation laws, religious persecution. These systems legally and morally sanction the lower status of entire groups, making their marginalization seem legitimate, inevitable. This inflicts not just economic hardship, but deep psychological trauma and chronic stress across generations. Lack of status becomes a state-sponsored reality.
Okay, then you have business leaders. Their domain is...
They largely define modern success metrics. What does it mean to be successful? High income, powerful corporate title, stock portfolio, the ability to consume certain goods and services.
And they promote a certain culture around achieving that.
Very much so. A culture of intense competition, long hours, constant striving, the hustle culture. Status becomes tied to relentless, often unsustainable levels of achievement. You're only as good as your latest deal or your quarterly earnings.
Which leads to burnout, even for people who are technically successful by those metrics.
Absolutely. The insecurity is baked in. Because status is always provisional, tied to the next win, you can never rest. It fuels professional anxiety, imposter syndrome, and burnout, even among high earners. The goalposts are always moving.
And finally, civic specialists and cultural elites. Academics, artists, intellectuals, media figures. What do they define?
They set the standards for taste and refinement. What counts as sophisticated, cultured, intellectually respectable? Good taste in art, literature, music, food, even opinions.
And how does this create anxiety?
It generates what the analysis calls cultural anxiety. This is the fear of being perceived as uncultured, unintelligent, déclassé, lacking refinement. It's the anxiety of not having the right opinions, not knowing the right authors or filmmakers, not displaying the right cultural signals.
So people consume certain things not just for pleasure, but to signal they belong to the cultured group.
Precisely. It drives a form of conspicuous consumption focused on cultural capital, buying certain books, attending certain events, holding certain intellectual positions, partly to signal your membership in an elite cultural group, and crucially to avoid the shame of being seen as lacking taste or sophistication. It's another arena for status competition, often intertwined with, but distinct from, purely economic status.
Okay, that paints a pretty comprehensive and, frankly, unsettling picture. Let's try to pull it all together in Section 5, the psychological consequences. We've seen how the environment, stratified, competitive, mediated, interacts with our evolved biology. What's the net result for the human mind?
The synthesis is that this modern environment effectively weaponizes our evolved psychology. Those mechanisms that were originally adaptive for navigating small group social life, like sensitivity to rank, fear of exclusion, are now chronically overstimulated in a way that's maladaptive.
Generating specific mental health problems.
Yes. The most direct outcome is chronic status anxiety.
That constant low-grade fear of judgment and failure we talked about?
Exactly. It's the feeling that your social standing is perpetually precarious, that you're constantly being evaluated against impossible standards, and that failure looms large. Because the system presents this risk constantly, our evolved threat detection systems, including the HPA axis, remain chronically activated. We end up living in a state of near constant low-level stress.
And that chronic stress leads to actual physiological breakdown.
Right. This isn't just in our heads. The sustained activation of the HPA axis, the continuous exposure to cortisol, it takes a physical toll. As we discussed, it's strongly linked to increased rates of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, inflammation, weakened immune response, and contributes significantly to anxiety disorders. The social world is making us physically unwell through these stress pathways.
And then there's the impact on our sense of agency, our belief that we can actually control our lives.
That's the loss of self-efficacy. When you're embedded in a system that feels rigged, when you see the meritocracy narrative failing around you, when your efforts seem futile against huge systemic barriers, it erodes your fundamental belief that you can actually influence your outcomes.
You start to feel powerless.
Precisely. Which fuels hopelessness, demotivation, learned helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
all major components of depression.
Mm.
Why bother striving if you genuinely believe the game is rigged against you?
And when that feeling of powerlessness, combined with the shame of perceived failure and the constant sting of social comparison, becomes unbearable.
Then you get escapism.
Uh-huh.
The psychological pain becomes too acute. The shame, the anxiety, the feeling of being judged a failure, driven by both that ancient biological fear of low rank and the modern cultural narrative that blames the individual. It creates intense distress.
So people look for ways to numb that pain.
It's exactly. Self-medication through alcohol, drugs, or other compulsive behaviors can become a way to temporarily silence that internal alarm, to escape the painful reality of status competition and perceived inadequacy. It's an attempt to cope with chronic psychological distress caused by the social environment. So if we zoom out and summarize this whole deep dive, we started with humans evolving away from pure dominance towards cooperative prestige, shaped by the need for group survival and the threat of coalitionary punishment.
A system based more on earned respect and contribution.
Right. But then civilization happened.
Yeah?
Agriculture, surplus, stratification, institutional power, mass media. These forces reshaped the landscape. They effectively reverted the status game back into a harsh, high-stakes competition, but one played with new, often abstract, culturally defined rules.
And this modern system ends up triggering our ancient biological stress responses in a chronic way.
It really does.
Yeah.
We took this evolved need to belong, to be valued, to be secure within our group, a fundamental survival mechanism, and we built social structures that constantly threaten that need, that weaponize it through inequality, judgment, and relentless comparison.
The whole system is profoundly biosocial. Our deep-seated psychology is constantly interacting with and being stressed by these complex, variable, and often unfair cultural norms and material
It's
displays.
ironic, isn't it? We develop the amazing cognitive abilities needed for prestige, for recognizing skill, value, and generosity, building reputation through language. But we then use those same cognitive abilities to construct these incredibly complex, abstract hierarchies based on wealth, titles, cultural taste that end up causing widespread anxiety and stress, punishing people for failing to meet criteria that are often arbitrary or impossible to achieve.
The key takeaway seems inescapable. The anxiety many of us feel about our jobs, our finances, our social standing. It isn't just a personal failing or a quirk of personality. It's often a predictable response generated by the collision between our evolved psychology and the structure of modern society. That structure is activating primal survival alarms.
Which leads us to the final, really challenging thought for you, the listener, to ponder.
Given everything we've discussed, that chronic low status, the constant struggle for rank, the fear of judgment, all demonstrably activate our deepest biological stress responses.
The question then becomes, is it possible to design society differently? What kind of social structure, what kind of economic system, maybe what form of community could actively deactivate these evolved social threat mechanisms? Could we build a low-anxiety society, one that fulfills our need for status and belonging without weaponizing it? Or is this constant underlying status threat simply an unavoidable feature baked into the very nature of large-scale, complex human civilization?